Okay, our next speaker has a decade of software engineering experience from e-commerce to database development. He's currently the cloud architect for Instana, an observability platform by IBM. Here to talk to you about preparing your SIEM for analyzing teleport audit events, please welcome to the stage Hunter Madison.
So, hi folks. My name is Hunter Madison, and I'm going to be talking about getting ready for the big day, preparing your SIEM for analyzing teleport. So a little bit more about me. I am, a long-time user and abuser of teleport. They foolishly had me out last year and convinced me to come back this year because it's much warmer this time. For what I want to just go through is really talking about, you've bought teleport, you've implemented it. There's a gap between having a security tool and having to use the security tool where you think about, okay, what does this tool give me? And ultimately, it gives you protection. So from an agenda perspective, I want to cover the post-onboarding problems and things you're going through. I want to talk about context in your organization. I want to talk about just-in-time access. I basically want to talk about how do you travel through time. And then I want to go through a selected scenario to show, why you need to do this type of collection. So post-onboarding. You might have, if you're a teleport customer, reached the big day where your end users are fully on teleport. You don't have any ad hoc systems. There's no virtual private networks floating around that people have to manage. Your keys are rotating automatically. People sign in through single sign-on. You're passwordless. You have FIDO keys are all everywhere. Two-factor devices, any sticky notes that have passwords on them you've taken and shredded or sent to Iron Mountain to get burned. You're clean. There's no LDAP server that has to synchronize keys. It also touches NFS with home directories. It's just user access, just in time. But the problem with this is that fundamentally, you're looking at an access product. You're looking at a product that is going to give you the ability to get in and get out when you need to. You're not necessarily looking at teleport as a system of record for when something goes wrong. So the thing is, have you had to deal with a security incident which involves teleport? And going back to IBM numbers, it's $4.45 million, your average cost of a data breach. This is a 2023, I believe, IBM security report. That means in 2 data breaches, you will have spent enough money doing that remediation to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool with a vinegar-based salad dressing. And if you get up to 4 data breaches, you can switch it over to blue cheese. So just think about that in terms of volume of 1, salad dressing, and 2, your problem is a physical representation. These things hurt you, your customers, and your business when they go south. And you have to have not only just tools to keep you safe now, but a process that lets you look back in time to demonstrate that you were safe. Because the thing is with the big day is that you're dealing with boundaries. Teleport is a great access management tool. I have used it since version 3 across 4 companies, but it's not a solution to understanding the process that got people into teleport, through teleport, onto a system to ultimately cause a problem. Because fundamentally, teleport doesn't have a resource that is your business. It has resources that support your business, but again, there's no way to go and TSH or TCTL apply, my business is a computer process yet. I don't know, let's give Sasha a couple of months and see what happens. But the thing with security is that the security relevant information that truly matters, why something happened, why do we even do this in the first place, that's never going to be within the scope of teleport. And my point to all of you is why are you going to settle for having less context when trying to analyze this when fundamentally in your world, you have so much more data available? Because the thing is that no one is perfect. Any system that you're going to build is going to get breached, whether it be on purpose through a penetration test, an external actor, somebody messing up and leaving their laptop unlocked, and people going to lunch and thinking, oh, hey, let's have a fun joke and log into production and add some extra phony records. It's happened. It's never fun to deal with. And the thing is you have to understand the full scope of the breach. Because if you understand the full scope of the breach, that is ultimately the most paramount piece of being able to remediate it, because your customers, whether internally or externally, need you to demonstrate that you understand exactly what happens. And then the larger your customer gets, again, internally or externally, the more they're going to demand that. A really good example is the fact that when you have customers in regulated environment, think federal, think financial, they're going to really force this issue. I know that there are banks that are going to demand you as your data subprocessor, you hold onto records for a decade. So think about how fast technology moves, and think about having to have a log from today, 10 years from now. Like, it's crazy, but that's what they've written down, and when it comes to a sales motion, that's how you get the money, is saying yes. And ultimately, as a security team, we do this in support of the business, so we have to make sure that the tooling and the practices that we put in place can help complete those motions too. And the other thing is, like, security issues are never going to be clean. It's never just, oh, this package was vulnerable and the server got hacked. It's always, this package is vulnerable, the server got hacked, that server gave them access to something else, and it's these cascading effects that you have to be able to account for. So I want to touch on just-in-time access a little bit, because just-in-time access is really, really good, and you should totally be using this feature if you can. Like, seriously. Shen's talk from earlier is great. This is getting better all the time. It's really extensible. It's really customizable. You can get a lot of your business tooling automated through it. But the problem with this, I'm out of sync. The problem with this is that when you talk about this in terms of separation of duties, and again, compliance situations, federal, financial, this is where they're going to say, hey, the person that has the access can't be the person that approves the access, and maybe you need their manager and some owner to approve it. Like, really common regulatory setup. You're going to run into these issues where you're going to have to now go and investigate more of these interpersonal interactions, because again, as our wonderful keynote was, it's like security is not really about technology, it's about people. And the big issue that I've seen with just-in-time to try to say, oh yeah, we don't need all this work, we're just going to just-in-time it, is the fact that people will just click the button and go and do it. I'm thinking of you, Gordon. You're just going to hit the button on everything and you run into these problems. So ultimately, when you deploy Teleport and you have it running and you have it as a critical part of your business, you kind of have to build a time machine. So either I'm going to show up on stage next to myself and explain how to actually build a time machine, and since that hasn't happened yet, that's clearly off the table today, we're going to have to be looking at some type of data warehousing platform, some type of data warehousing configuration, because we're going to have a ton of things that we have to bring in, contextualize, store, and then analyze after the fact and try to make sure that we have enough dimensions in place to go and solve a problem. So unfortunately, and I do hate to talk about this is not going to be cheap. The bigger you are, the more expensive it's going to be. I spend a ridiculous amount of money each month for mine, and you will probably end up spending a ridiculous amount of money each month for yours, and it's going to be something that you're just going to have finance be okay with, because on top of needing to just hold on to data, vendors really like to upsell this. Cloud providers especially, they're going to charge you for the bandwidth to get the data. They're going to charge you for the storage to store the data. They're going to charge you for the other storage to store the data in a format that you can query. And then they're going to charge you just for the privilege of having access to that data. And this gets repeated across AWS, across Google, across Azure, across services like Okta, services like Jamf, just all of these companies where you have your enterprise tier, and that enterprise tier includes things like, oh yeah, we'll give you full access to all of your logs. You're going to have to go and deal with that, and you're going to get billed by basically everyone in that chain. And especially if you're in a public cloud and you want to get logs from another public cloud and centralize them, you're going to see 10 or 20 fees just tacked on each byte of data that you have to process. And the other problem with this, and the reason why this gets very expensive, again, going back to compliance, you're dealing with compliance-driven data hoarding. Like, again, finance, I've seen Turkey, it'll go up to 10 years. FedRAMP, if you want to do stuff with the United States government at a high level with the Joint Authorization Board, so that means you go in front of essentially the DoD, and the military says, yeah, we think that you're doing security right. Well, they say that you have to mirror every single packet that you send across a network interface for 72 hours as part of their logging regimen. And if you're a high traffic application, you have to do all of your packet mirroring and then every other logging source that you have. And this can be terabytes and terabytes of data. So it is one of these things where you understand your compliance needs first, because if your compliance needs are limited, okay, sure, maybe you can get away with this with a few $1,000s a month. But there is no upper bound to the amount of money that you're going to have to dump in to spend this problem. And I really want to stress this point, because this is where, especially with public clouds, to where you're not paying up front, you will see some sticker shock, so be ready on that. The next point is how are you actually going to go and run this? There's two routes that I think you can go realistically today. There's hosted vendors. So there's IBM QRadar or Watson X Data. I work at part of IBM, so I'd like people to use that software so I can keep getting paid. There's also other cloud lakehouse vendors. You see ClickHouse has their cloud offering that if you like ClickHouse is pretty good. Snowflake is another common one. BigQuery in Google Cloud. Azure has a SQL query option. Its name escapes me. Amazon has Athena, which is also pretty popular. But the idea is that you're ultimately going to have a place to put your data and analyze that data. So whether it be, again, QRadar, or maybe like SageMaker with Athena, or QuickSight if you're in the Amazon ecosystem, or BigQuery plus Looker, or Power BI plus like CosmoDB, you can go over to a hosted vendor, pay more for storage, but you will get nice visualization and analysis tools out of the box, and they're also going to go and take off a good chunk of the hosting burden. So all you really have to do is get the data into a place where they can sync it and then store it in their systems, set up your retention policies. The other option is you can go self-hosted and open source. There is tons and tons and tons of tools that do this, and I think like every time I open up Hacker News, there's another observability startup that's essentially rebadging ClickHouse and offering this type of stuff. So pick which one that you like from there. My suggestion, if you've not seen any of them, is there's Presto and TrinoDB, which is essentially the technology Amazon Athena is based off of. It's the lakehouse, store of your data in object storage, so it's pretty cheap. Apache Pinot, if you're okay with running SSDs for your data storage needs and spinning disks for your storage needs, and not necessarily taking care of object storage, it's really good. They just hit 1.0, and I really like their database. There's ClickHouse, which is based around San Francisco. They're very popular, and again, they have not only a cloud version, but an open source self-hosted version. Cool part about ClickHouse is a lot of the logging tools natively will sync into ClickHouse, so you can save yourself a step. Although, talk to me after the talk if you want some more details on configuration issues that you might need to avoid. And then finally, there's OpenSearch and Elasticsearch, and especially if you want to pay for Elasticsearch Enterprise, they have a really, really competitive, out-of-the-box, easy-to-use, just entire SIEM that I know that a lot of people like if you don't necessarily want to go like the QRadar route. The other thing about this is that you have to get the data. This is, in my experience, the King Solomon story. So very much expect to people trying to rip things apart when you're taking them, but unfortunately the value of this data warehouse is based off of the value of the data that you get. In a rough order, I would really suggest making yourself a priority list of what you need to grab, and my general view is, start with your teleport logs, because you probably own teleport and can lay hands on them. Look at your cloud audit logs. So if you're in Google, that's going to be the Google Cloud logs from the root of your organization. It's also going to be your G Suite logs, because those two things get tied together. If you're in Amazon, that's CloudTrail from your root organization. And also remember, if you're in an organization situation with Control Tower in Amazon, you have to make sure all of your sub-accounts bubble up or bubble over to some logging account so you can effectively grab everything. I'd suggest grabbing server audit log next. So this will be coming from audit D essentially. You're going to want your database access logs, then your identity provider access logs. So again, if you're in Google, it's your G Suite logs. If you're using something like Okta or IBM Security Verify, it'll be logs from that platform. If you're in AD, it's your AD logs. Those are really great to have. If you're using an EDR solution, grab the EDR event logs because they're going to tell you more than what Teleport will tell you, since Teleport only looks at the session, but EDR in many cases now looks at the kernel level, so it's more than audit D, and more than Teleport, which is pretty handy. If you have application access logs, which are useful, again, good to have. This is where you're really dealing more with insiders that aren't necessarily using Teleport, but potentially like support accounts, like what happened to Okta recently. If you have physical offices, your office networking logs are pretty critical. And then, just basically everything else you can grab. And then I'd say your last thing to look at is flow logs, because flow logs are the most expensive and generally the most useless. In my experience, you really, really have to be desperate to go into flow logs. And yeah, this is a long list and this is a lot of stuff, but the problem is what you're trying to do when you think about this is that you have to go and imagine yourself 6 months from now. How do I go back in time and figure out a problem? So just accept the fact that this is going to be a lot of work. I mean, I do this now for a living, and believe me, every single time I think oh yes, I have a data source in the data warehouse. Well, I get a request for 20 more. I mean, it's an unending stream of work, but unfortunately, if you want to be able to go and demonstrate, to other parties and to yourself that yeah, look, we've solved this problem, you need to get the work done. So a little, tip and trick on traveling through time. This is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you've never seen this before, I really like this thing because it's an open framework. It describes a ton of common attack patterns. It's really, really detailed. And the cool part is that they have amazing references. So you have this wonderful ontology of terms to map to. And the best tip I was ever given for working on any security-related reports is you start with a MITRE definition. You say what that is, then you explain why the problem relates to it. And you already have 2 pages of your report done. So thank you, Dustin, for that one. And then let's just kind of walk through a bit of a selected scenario to just show off why we want to do all this stuff with the MITRE ATT&CK framework and kind of give folks just this idea of, okay, well, what am I actually looking at doing when I'm being told, hey, let's go back in time, let's analyze these logs. So I'm going to focus on a valid account attack, just because if you're doing your security hygiene right, this is what Teleport generally tends to stop. If you've fully implemented Teleport, you're not going to have necessarily a credential stuffing problem. You're going to have someone who has somehow acquired valid account credentials going into the system and playing around with it in malicious ways. So let's make the assumption that, hey, an attacker used an existing account to start the attack. I don't know, maybe they plugged in the flash drive that had some malware and that copied all their cookies off to a remote server. The key questions that I would be asked at this point is well, one, what did they actually do? What commands were executed? What things happened? Number 2, which is really critical, is where was that malicious user coming from? Something to keep in mind is that especially if your IDP doesn't lock out people from logging in from multiple locations in the short time frame, especially on geographies, you can have people that might be sitting in an office in San Francisco logging in, and someone 12 hours away is trying to log in Eastern Europe to go and do something nefarious. And then the other point about this is was the host machine compromised? Because again, with these valid account credentials is you have to rule out, okay, well, is this person a victim of another attack and that's why I'm having this problem? Or am I dealing with a malicious insider that, say, wants to copy all the data in my ERP system because they're going to go to a competitor next week and they want to take all their sales leads with them? And this is, again, why we have this wide ontology, which essentially looks like this. I realize the diagram looks a little bit on the compressed side, but the idea is we're essentially focusing on 5-dimensional tables. We have one for audit D, one for Teleport, and then IDP and essentially office networking and MDM. So the idea is that sticking these 5 tables together, it's going to be able to give us this understanding of, okay, what was done, who did it, and then where did they do it? And from those questions, we then can necessarily go and start making guesses as to why, and especially if you have to, say, get legal involved and do interviews, this is the evidence that you present in, your courtroom / cop style interrogation of hey, what are we going to do? So again, like the starting point of, I think, all these attacks, and this is what you generally get at a teleport if you go through the UI, is what actually happened. And this is going to be, okay, I've gone through teleport and I've run a command. Now, this is where I think teleport kind of leaks out. If the command is like, hey, I set up some systemd timer to kick off my command to try to avoid detection, well, you're going to see the systemd timer get installed, but you're not necessarily going to see what else happens. So this is where you can go, okay, well, teleport says that they did this command. Systemd then says these system actions happened based off of that object, and that essentially gives us these two links to go and say, maybe, all right, they started the reverse shell. And this is where essentially you go and you say, okay, I'm going to join the commands that are executed, the time and the user, to say the systemd group, then the time, so I get like a windowing that I can then start looking at, and maybe you throw your user attributes in there. If you then want to push forward on that, you then have to start thinking, okay, well, if I know the user and I know what they did, where are they coming from? If you have identity provider logs, they might give you an IP address and a pre-geocoded location. If you have load balancer logs on teleport and they went in through teleport, or web application firewall logs, they might give you the session ID and also the IP address of that user session, which in some cases can work if you're geocoding. Although, fair warning on geocoding, the quality of your database impacts the quality of your geocoding, so make sure you're using one that is up to date. But the idea is again, I can take my IDP and my teleport audit log, link those two sessions together, and now I'm essentially able to go and see, okay, well, if I have the action that's occurred, the person that did the action, and how they actually went and initiated that action, this gives me a pretty good indicator of, okay, well, we know it was, I don't know, John Doe, and we know that they took this log. So let's keep pushing forward. The idea is, okay, well, why did Joe do this? Or specifically, why did Joe's credentials do this? And I think the trick here is that this is where, okay, we know what happened, we know where it happened, and now we have to understand what device it happened on. So let's say you're in the office and you talk to your wireless network, you're going to be able to see from your routers, hey, this laptop, which is Joe's laptop, talked to this radio, this is their MAC address at this time. You can grab IPs, you can grab that network connectivity, and link it into the entire attack framework. So, and again, like this is us basically getting through this entire attack scenario, because what we're able to basically go through and do is say, okay, Joe did this action using systemd at this point in time. Here's all the actions that happened. Here's all the resulting actions that happened because of that. And we'll know definitively, like, hey, his laptop got hacked or his laptop didn't get hacked. So just like the idea that as you go through and do this analysis, and as you go through and build out this data warehouse with whatever technology that you do, the point is that you want to think about, this is the underlying problem that I'm trying to solve, which is I need to get to a point where I can take a remediation step that's appropriate for an organization, whether that be as extreme as employee termination, or benign as telling the user, hey, you're not supposed to do that, go read the help text that pops up the first time you use sudo. Again, the point is that you're going to get asked to, at some point, by legal or customers or your CISO or someone in your organization, to walk backwards in time and answer a question about the security stuff. So my one push on this, before I take questions is, think about this problem, understand the fact that teleport's a really, really great tool, but also just understand that, like, as you try to get ready for the big day and get yourself prepared for actually analyzing this data, it is just a lot of work. And, as you start to have these conversations with your stakeholders and your team, just be ready for that problem. And thank you all for having me again.
Thank you, Hunter. All right, any questions for Hunter? If not, I've got a question. How do you see AI playing into this? And it's a pretty broad question, but it's a very complex analysis to do, and you have to really understand the underlying data. Can AI be used here to really simplify that?
So What I like about some of the new AI approaches that we're seeing getting applied to data warehouses, I think there's two categories. Category one is AI that's trying to interpret the data directly. I think that is fraught with some issues because it's, again, goes back to this entire, well, if there's no way to programmatically describe the resource, your business context to teleport, that gets kind of hairy. I think where AI is really helpful is the work that they've been doing in helping users that have questions of data, but might not necessarily understand SQL or, say, the Elastic query language, or need help visualizing or finding other patterns. It's the idea of I can, and that, like, again, back to the stuff that Sasha was doing with getting OpenAI into Teleport, I can ask it a question like, hey, I need to find everyone that accessed this database server in a natural interface, and that lets the analyst, start with an AI having a conversation of, okay, this is everyone that looked at that database, but now who looked at that database and who looked at that record? The other place I see it being really useful for is visualization, where it can go and highlight certain things in, say, time series data or event clustering that you might not necessarily see looking at a giant table.
Nice, thank you.
So of course I have to ask a question. So you showed the mapping, right? Where you go from a specific set of logs to answer the question based on the MITRE framework. And since you just moved us through the stages of grief, and probably everybody will have to go through the same stages on their own, are there templates or things where people can either find this or share this? So once one as you, for example, has suffered through them, others can suffer less. How would you approach this?
So if you are in a major cloud provider, all of them, AWS, Google, IBM, Azure, IBM Cloud, Oracle Cloud, Alibaba Cloud, they will all have templates. I think for me, the one that sticks out the most, because I've been doing Amazon since I was 19, is Amazon's well-architected framework. They include sections on security logging and security assistance, where if you're using their tools and okay with spending that money, they're going to give you a lot of the pre-canned setup stuff. The one thing I will say about that is, while you can do cloud providers pretty easily, stuff like routers and network flow logs, again, it's pretty standard and pretty common. When you get into things like databases, in my experience, and your applications where you have, say, an internal third-party audit log or other SaaS applications floating around, from an analysis perspective, it can get pretty hairy and require a lot of manual work. If you are, though, looking for some, air quotes, more vendor-neutral approaches, QRadar has a bunch of integrations in QSuite that, are drag and drop for a lot of these log types. And then Elastic has their Elastic Agent framework, which has both an open source and an enterprise version. And they have tons of pre-canned integrations from everything from AWS to EDR. So if you're looking to get something in the pinch, I'd start, with those two, since they'll give you, I'd say, the fastest ROI if you just, need to spend money to get out of this problem.